Esther wasn't even supposed to be there, you know? She wasn't she wasn't even supposed to be there when this whole crazy thing that is like her life happened. She wasn't even supposed to be there. Esther is an Israelite, or at least the descendant of an Israelite, right? And she's supposed to be in Israel. She's not supposed to be in the middle of this entirely different country, an empire. She's not supposed to be in the middle of the Persian Empire. But she is. She is. She's supposed to be in Israel. She's not even where she's supposed to be. Esther is the descendant of Israelites who, over a century ago, had been conquered by invading armies who conquered her country as if they had some right to come in to her ancestors' country, conquer it, and then literally took people by the tens of thousands and shipped them all across the empire. It was this empire's way of making sure that you didn't know enough of your neighbors to form a rebellion. And Esther, 100 years later or more, is the product of that decision. She's not even supposed to be here. And here she is, middle of the Persian Empire, being raised by her Uncle Mordecai. Uncle Mordecai. So every day, Esther, who is not where she's supposed to be, goes out into the world around her and speaks Persian all day long, right? She goes to the market where she buys things. Maybe she sells things. I don't actually know what she did for a living, but whatever she does all day long, she goes out and she speaks Persian because that's the language everybody speaks. We're in the middle of the Persian Empire. Everybody speaks Persian. I guess that's what you speak to get along. But then she goes home at night to her family, to Uncle Mordecai, and she speaks the language that Mordecai speaks, that Mordecai spoke as he was raising her when she was a little girl. They speak Hebrew. And anytime they're lucky enough to be able to hang out with other descendants of Israelites, they speak Hebrew. Esther is caught in between these two worlds in a way that, frankly, some of us really understand. She's not the powerful group in her country, and she is deeply aware of that. How could you not be? Same time, there's a king in this empire. He decides he wants a new queen. So the emperor decides that the best way to do this, being a responsible head of state, a responsible person in charge of an entire empire's worth of people, he decides that the most mature and most appropriate way to pick a new queen is with a beauty pageant. Yeah, that's what he does. That's how the story goes. Beauty pageant. A empire-wide beauty pageant. So word goes out, and people are finding the most beautiful. I assume that was probably the main qualification, actually. Most beautiful women from all across the empire, bringing them together, and so we could have a contest for the king to pick a new queen. So, I don't know. That's what that is. It's a Disney movie. That's what this whole story is. It's a Disney movie. So anyway, Uncle Mordecai says, you know what, Esther, you'd make a pretty good queen too. Why don't you get in this contest? So she gets in the contest because her uncle told her to. And lo and behold, she wins the whole contest. She becomes the new queen, as you probably predicted, because otherwise we wouldn't be telling this story, right? So Esther, come to find out, is the new queen of the Persian Empire. And she's not even supposed to be here. So Esther goes from being poor and like pretty marginalized, but like having her people, right? Like she had Uncle Mordecai, they had some other Israelite neighbors that they got together and they understood each other. They ate the same kinds of food, like, they would tell the same stories. They saw the world in kind of the same way, and she got to relax around them, right? She got to just be who she was around them and didn't have to like speak this other language and eat these other foods and, figure out these other customs and understand this other. She didn't, she was poor, but like she had a degree of comfort with her people. She goes from that to the complete opposite, where she's wealthy as all get out, has people who wait on her all the time. She's a queen of a powerful empire, right? And so there's tons of luxury that comes with that. But at the same time, curiously enough, she gets isolated from her people. She gets isolated from them so that she's not actually able to hang out with the other Israelites that much. And in fact, even Uncle Mordecai, she gets to talk to Uncle Mordecai sometimes, but not nearly as much as she did when they lived in the same house, right? She's not even supposed to be here. Esther winds up in this situation. She winds up in this situation that's not that different from us. Esther winds up in a situation where she's got a lot to be thankful for. I mean, if we're honest, she's got a lot to be thankful for. She's got like all this luxury in the same way that we have, like often most of us have lots of luxuries, right? Like we got Netflix and we've got the internet and we've got like YouTube and we've got plenty to eat, right? But at the same time, we don't get to talk to our Mordecais, whoever they are, We don't get to be with our Mordecais. Sometimes you get to talk to them, right? We're in a world with FaceTime and endless Zoom meetings. You get to talk to them, but you don't get to be with them. You don't get to whatever it is you do with your people. You don't get to sit around a table at lunch and talk about whatever you want to, or nothing at all like that. In the way you can't just have a normal conversation, right? You don't get to be with lots of your people. I think it's interesting there's the story in the Bible that is so similar to what a lot of us are going through. Story's not over. Sorry, I got distracted. Story's not even over. So the story proceeds. There's an advisor to the king, a guy named Haman, and Haman really does not like the Israelites. So he goes to the king and he says, "King, there's these people in your empire from a country that used to exist called Israel, and their customs are different, their language is different, and I gotta tell you, King, I don't think we can trust them. I think we need to send out an order across the whole empire that on a certain day, we're gonna kill them all." Like right out of like The Purge or something, right? And so he talks the king into this. So the order goes through. So Mordecai finds out about this and goes and finds his niece. He realizes, this is an awful, horrible thing, but a lot of flies here at Lazy W, guys. So he realizes it's a horrible thing, but he also realizes like he knows the queen, right? So he goes to the queen, his niece, tells her what's up, and says, "Esther, you gotta talk to the king about this. You gotta do something about this. You're the only person who can." And Esther, when she hears about this order that's gone out, she's horrified. She's reminded again that she is a part of a people who have always been kind of disliked by their neighbors, tolerated, but like often disliked or kind of not trusted by their neighbors. She belongs to a people that has never really belonged, She's reminded again, she's reminded how unjust and broken this whole situation is. She's not even supposed to be here. And she knows Mordecai is right. That this awful situation is just one more in like a string of insults. But finally, she's in a position where maybe she can do something. But she also knows something that is not apparent to us as modern Americans. She knows that the Persian king has the ability to kill anyone who comes into his presence if they're not summoned, right? And she doesn't exactly get summoned by the king every day. So she knows that if she tries to she can't just go and approach the king, which is kind of what you would think. You'd think she's the queen, just go talk to the king. She can't do that. And if she tried it, it might get her killed. So she's having this conversation with Uncle Mordecai. She tells him this, and he responds with one of the most famous lines in the entire Bible. He says, Esther, what do we know but that you were born for such a time as this? Maybe you were born for such a time as this. He's saying maybe you were born for exactly this difficult situation. Maybe you were literally born for this very moment. Y'all, we are living in a difficult moment. There's a global pandemic. There's so far 140,000 Americans dead from it. That's just in the United States. At the same time, we're doing that. We're isolating socially, like we're all basically staying away from each other. At the same time, there's new energy in the anti-racism movement after George Floyd. Did you see this video? And we're reminded again that in spite of it being an issue for literally hundreds of years in this country, racism is still one of our biggest problems. We're reminded that my generation still hasn't figured it out. The generation before me didn't really make much progress. The generation before that didn't make a lot of progress. The generation before that made a little progress. Like, it is slightly better than it was 100 years ago. But racism is still a huge problem in this country. You know, and I think a lot of us are just overwhelmed, you know, like we're tired. We're just tired of all of this. We're tired, and we're like, I mean, maybe that's it. Maybe it's just tired, you know? Maybe you feel something different, but we're overwhelmed with all of this stuff that's going on. This is easily the most difficult year our country has faced in a long time. A long time. But I think maybe Esther's words from her uncle are the words for us today. Maybe we were born for precisely this moment because we are the people for this moment. Maybe, even though it's a difficult moment, maybe we are the people that the world needs right now. Maybe we have to make the same decision Esther did. Even though it's hard, maybe we are the people to stand up and face that difficult thing. And in spite of our loneliness and in spite of our frustration at being separated from those around us, in spite of our longing for justice, maybe we are the people to stand up and address the issue. Maybe we were literally created for this moment. There's something else that's weird about the book of Esther. Esther is one of two books in the Bible. There's almost a third that never mention God. They never mention the name of Yahweh. I don't know if you knew this. Yahweh is literally the name of God. If God had a mama and she was calling him in for dinner, God doesn't have a gender. God, and mama was calling God in for dinner. It's supper time, you know, and she yells out across the neighborhood. She would yell, Yahweh, come home for dinner. Yahweh is the name of God. The name Yahweh is pervasive in the Bible, but it's never mentioned in the book of Esther. Isn't that curious? And yet it's in the Bible. When you read the book of Esther, it reads like an ancient book, but a fairly secular book. It really reads like an ancient Disney story, a Disney princess story. It really does. And it reads like a group of like this marginalized society trying to survive this horrendous thing that's going to happen to them, right? It reads like a bunch of... You forget about the flies at Lazy W, don't you? Anyway, the book reads like this story of just secular politics and struggling for power and things. I mean, it reads like a secular book. And yet, it's in the Bible. That reminds me of our lives, you know? I think that's how our lives work for most of us. Most of us don't have this sense that God is with us in every moment. Sometimes when we're lucky in life, we get that usually it's for a period of time. But mostly, most of us don't walk around with just the sense that God is present in every moment, in every space. Like, no, we like get out of bed, we go to the bathroom, we brush our teeth, we have an argument with somebody in our family, we eat breakfast, we go to school, and then like you've got the normal stuff at school, like you're figuring out what people to stay away from, you know. Like it doesn't seem that religious, you know. It's very secular. And yet, the book of Esther is in the Bible. The book of Esther is showing us how God works in the Bible. You read Esther a second time, you can't help but notice the work of God all over the place. Even this famous quote from Mordecai, it doesn't say God, it doesn't say Yahweh, but I mean, there's a really strong implication that that's what Mordecai is talking about, right? Who knows but that you were born for such a time? Who knows but that God created you and put you here in this specific situation because God knew that you were going to be needed? He doesn't say it. You know, when we look at Martin Luther King Jr., for example, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? He had this plan for how to call attention to the violence against especially African Americans, right? His plan with these marches, was to do something that was perfectly legal, march down the street, and do it in a way that he knew would irritate local white people, and hopefully those local white people would come and treat this large group the same way they often treated individual black people in private, except now hopefully they'll do it in public in front of this big crowd. Like, that was the plan. That's the plan. And then when that's in public, that when the violence is public, then maybe the United States would do something about it. That was the plan. Doesn't seem that religious. I mean, it you know, you like the plan, you don't like the plan, but it doesn't seem like a particularly religious plan, right? And yet, you look under the surface, you read what Martin Luther King wrote, and you see that he was motivated by his commitment to Jesus. Martin Luther King was a pastor, Reverend Martin Luther King, who led this campaign for civil rights out of his belief in what Jesus was doing and had done. It seems secular, and yet. Or you think about like the current anti-racism movement in the country, right? It's spreading globally, but we'll focus on our own country. You think about that, and it doesn't seem religious, right? You watch the news, you watch the clips on YouTube about what's going on, about marches, or you see photos, or you read speeches people are making, you know, and it doesn't seem religious. And yet, I think that what Esther discovered, what her people discovered, was that often God is at work even when God is not specifically named. Often God is at work even when the name of God is not mentioned. Often, for us Christians, Jesus' work is being done even by people who would not say, I am doing the work of Jesus. But there they are, all the same, doing the work of Jesus. I think that's where we are as Jesus followers in the middle of 2020. Our curriculum this year, which was, you probably are aware, was designed for what should have been our normal summer camp this year. We're adapting it a little bit for this week, and we changed a lot, but at the core, there's still this curriculum that Lazy W got. And the curriculum really emphasizes longings. And each day was supposed to talk about a different longing in the human heart. So today's longings, they really wanted to highlight two longings. And the first is a longing for community. And I mean, even if you forget this global pandemic, right, and all this social isolation stuff, even if you forget all that stuff, there's still this longing for community. I mean, a lot of us wonder if we're loved, who loves us, where are we accepted, and it's really important to us to find those places, you know. And then if you add on top of that all this social isolation and social distancing and mostly staying apart from our friends to keep from spreading this virus, our longing for community is more pronounced this year maybe than ever, for most of us at least, you know. The second longing this curriculum emphasized is a longing for justice. And I think you see that in Esther's story. She's longing for justice in the same way that we are longing for justice. She was longing for a just world where a specific group of minority folks were no longer abused and taken advantage of and treated like second-class parts of this country, the Persian Empire. In the same way, I think a lot of us, especially this year, are longing for the justice that comes when African Americans and Latino folks and all these minority groups that are still sort of marginalized in our country are no longer treated like second-class citizens. We're longing for racial, ethnic justice. We're longing for an anti-racist country. Those longings do not seem religious. When you think about wanting to hang out with your friends from school, or when you think about wanting to hang out with your friends from youth group, or when you think about how you want to make this country less racist, it doesn't feel like those are religious things. But I'm telling you, just like in the book of Esther, they are. These are religious things. This is how God moves in the world. God usually moves in moments that don't seem dramatic and they don't seem religious. God mostly works in the normal day-to-day decisions and events of our lives. Y'all, I hope that you begin to see the ways that God is at work in these seemingly secular moments, in these seemingly secular longings that you have. I hope you see that God is at work there, God is with you there, and God is calling you to something better there. In these seemingly secular moments, I hope you will ask yourself, was I born for such a time as this?